Welcome everyone to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. When we're in our teens and early adulthood, we begin to think about the jobs and career we would like to do. We are building a resume. For Rob Browatzke, he didn't create a resume for himself. He has in fact created a gay-sume. His gay-sume includes work at numerous LGBTQ+ bars, pubs, and bathhouses. He is an accomplished writer with work as an LGBTQ+ columnist, magazine owner, and today a novelist. He is a gay historian who has written numerous articles about our rich local rainbow history for ECAMP, which stands for Edmonton City as Museum Project. This is in addition to other articles he has written. Today he is part owner of Evolution Wonderlounge, the last remaining LGBTQ+ identifying night spot in our community. In this interview today, we discuss this gay-sume, plus so much more. Be sure to like and subscribe to our Tales of the LGBTQ+ podcast across our many platforms. Word of mouth is excellent for us, so please share this as well as many other episodes that have been created to anybody you feel would benefit from listening. Today on Tales of the LGBTQ+, let's talk to Rob Browatzke, and that interview begins right now. Rob, thank you for coming on to Tales of the LGBTQ+. How's it going today?
It's going good. Thank you for having me. I knew it was coming up. Vanity and Ron are older, so you had to get them first.
I'm going to say nothing because I want them on future episodes once again. So I'm going to be Switzerland when it comes to that.
That is wise.
Rob, when you and I have been chatting backstage, talking about your upcoming interview, we've talked about your resume, or better wordage perhaps would be your gay-sume. When you're growing up in your teens and growing up, did you ever expect that your life would be so connected to the LGBTQ+ community?
No, absolutely not. When I was a teenager, I guess I wasn't really thinking too much about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had always wanted to kind of be a writer, and then I was smart in school, so my family and teachers just always assumed that I would go into education, which is what I did do when I went to university, but that got derailed by coming out, and then I have been a professional homosexual ever since.
Yes, you have. So when we think of LGBTQ+ nightlife, how many bars have you been a part of in your career?
Oh, I'd say it's got to be pushing 10. Like, I'd have to actually kind of count through them in order, but I'd say it's got to be around 10. I think in the 23 years that I've been around in Edmonton, I think there's probably been 15 to 18 kind of bars. So I haven't quite hit all of them, but a good chunk.
You need some of them to be resurrected just to check it off your list.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You're good. And then when it comes to LGBTQ+ community, the bathhouse has been a prominent part of the community as well. And you've had experience working at the bathhouse as well.
All three of them.
All three of them. So you have the gay-sume.
I have the gay-sume.
Yeah, so let's talk about things. But I'm going to start with where you're at right now. Rather than doing at the beginning of your career and doing Rob Browatzke, this is your life, let's maybe work in reverse. And so you are the proud owner of Evolution, based here in Edmonton. And why was it important for you to begin Evolution when you did?
part of the owner management team. It's with my uncles. My uncles had owned a couple gay hotels in Palm Springs in most of the 2000s, very successful, but the economy crashed and they were having to relocate back to Canada. And that was right around the same time that the Junction was closing. They actually wanted to open up a sex club, and they wanted it to be in Calgary. And so that was the original plan. And things did not work out that way. And we decided to open up a dance club in Calgary. And that also didn't work out. We just couldn't find a place with the right size and reasonable enough rent. And so we started shopping around back here and came across this space that used to be Play, which was the warehouse at the time. And I'm like, look, I've got this huge resume of life in Edmonton. I've got connections with community groups and connections with the business community. And I'm like, let's use that. In Calgary, it would have been a totally different adventure. We would have all been starting from scratch.
One of the great successes of Evolution is the rejuvenation of the drag queen and bringing forth the drag queen community and bringing up our drag kings, our burlesque. Why has tapping into these communities been an important part of your ongoing success with your bar?
The drag scene has always been connected to almost all of my jobs. And when we started Evolution, the drag scene in the city was very, very subdued, aside from the ongoing Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, and then the occasional show at Buddy's and stuff. But there wasn't really a lot else going on. Gay bars across Canada, the whole time I've been around, always had a Sunday night drag show, and that was something that I really wanted to bring back. In the past, it was hard for new people to get stage time in shows like that because they had to kind of work their way up. But with the huge increased interest in drag because of shows like Drag Race, there was just too many people were interested, and so that wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted right from the beginning. We wanted to be able to encourage and nurture new performers and make sure that all drag was valid, all drag was seen as valid. The burlesque thing was something I had no experience with before Evolution, and it was just something we tried to bump up our Friday nights originally, and certainly that's become a huge part of the space since. And there's increasing overlap between drag and burlesque performers, drag performers doing burlesque, burlesque performers doing drag.
Yeah, you've absolutely had to feel like you're a proud dad when you've been able to watch these newbies in these performance areas grow and add to their talents and become well known within the community and elsewhere. Is there a moment when you looked at your Sunday nights and went, yeah, we're doing this right. This feels good. This is exactly what I wanted it to be?
That was probably about a year after we started, when we had our first Stiletto Awards, which was like a drag award night, like the Oscars of drag, for not just Evolution, for just Edmonton in general. But just having the space packed with so many amazing drag performers and celebrating so many incredible drag moments over the past year, and having had so many of those moments happen in the space was pretty wonderful. That was Tequila's idea. Stiletto Awards was Tequila's idea. I have to give her credit or she'll slap me.
Or don't give her credit just so she can slap you. That we're equal opportunity when it comes to this. So is there a standout moment in general then with Evolution that stands out to you as far as, hey, we've got our role in the community and we're in it for the long haul?
There's honestly has been so many, like the drag superstar contest, which then we added on the burlesque superstar contest, and just the ongoing success of the Sunday shows. And we brought in so many like celebrity guests. It's been quite wonderful. But I think probably the moment where I was most proud of what we were doing is when we started off the street festival as part of Pride 2017, I think was the first one. Just because it was something that was really lacking. There wasn't a downtown component to Pride at that point. It was all on White Ave, and the beer gardens and festival on White Ave were a major fundraising vehicle for the Pride Festival itself. So there was no opportunities for all these other community groups who were putting on events and working so hard in our space and other spaces throughout the year, there was no opportunity for them to raise money on that queerest of days. So that's what we wanted to do. And I think 2017, 2018, 2019 was all pretty wonderful. And then 2020 came along and COVID canceled it, but things happen.
Well, and going with that, when COVID took place, 2020, when it started, you were just about to announce the 2020 street party for Pride. And of course, with everything that's taking place in this province, it's not going to happen this year as well. So when we are able to come together again in the Neil Diamond way, where we're reaching out, touching you, touching me, touching you type way, what is the gay nightlife going to be like when we come back together? Is it going to be the same as before, or are we going to be doing something different, do you think?
I guess we're going to find out. We're going to continue with what we were doing. We were going to, continue being the best space that we can, and being as open to all possible events and people as possible. Certainly, I think we plan on doing street festivals again for Pride. Whether or not Pride ends up having a parade ever again is something that would be for other groups to determine. That's certainly not in our wheelhouse. We'll support what we can, no matter where it's going on in the community. But yeah, I'm hoping that we get the Roaring 20s thing that we were all kind of waiting for. The 1920s were all wild and crazy, flapper good times, and I'm hoping that's what we get, and we just have a bit of a late start.
Or we can do the reverse of what the 1920s were, when everything was big at the beginning and then the crash happened at the end. Maybe it's just the reverse happening, and we're doing the crash at the moment.
I like that idea.
So I'm glad to hear that Evolution has the plans to come back and be up and running and being part of the community. We also have to realize that Evolution is our last LGBTQ plus bar within the city at the moment. And this is strange because for a long time we had multiple places to go. Can you talk about what has been the role of the bar or the LGBTQ pub in our community as far as its history and why it's been so important?
Well, certainly in Edmonton, it's been important for many reasons. For the longest time, the spaces were needed because that was the only way that queer people could connect with other queer people in a safe way. For the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, even some places now, you can't just walk into a straight bar and hit on somebody and have it end well necessarily. Increasingly, that is a possibility, and there's certainly a huge number of mainstream venues that are super queer friendly and have pop-up queer nights and drag shows, and it's wonderful to see, but that hasn't always been the case. The bars have also been a heart of fundraising for the community, whether that's individual groups or from like 1984 on for the fight against AIDS, when the government was not giving any money. That money was coming from events in gay bars. Ditto in the 90s, when funds were being raised to carry on legal battles, like the Dublin Vreen case and stuff. Those things cost money to challenge the government to get to fight for our human rights, and a lot of those fundraisers were happening in gay bars.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the first HIV campaign was started in the 1980s with the drag queen shows to raise money for to battle HIV and awareness itself. And so everything starts at a place, and our bars have been extremely important. You've mentioned at least 10 bars that you've been a part of, working, owning. What has the bar been like for you? Why have you gravitated towards this scene for your adult life?
I'm not really sure. I found, like, people talk about found family or chosen family, and that's what I had. Like when I moved back to Edmonton from Lethbridge, which is where I went for my post-secondary schooling, the only thing I knew that I wanted a gay job. I had had a sense of community in Lethbridge. It was quite small, but there was some nonprofits there that I was involved with, and I just wanted to recreate that feeling of community and family. And so I grabbed a copy of the business directory from the Edmonton Rainbow Business Association, and that's where I applied. Like, I didn't care what I was doing, as long as it was something queer. And yeah, that's how it went. The first bar that I worked at was Boots, and it was short lived, but I was already making connections at the Roost, and yeah, like, here we are 20 years later, and um, these people are my family. There's people still now in my life that I'm friends with that I met on those first bar shifts in 1999 and 2000, and that's pretty wonderful. And I think it's pretty rare. I don't know. Maybe straight people have that happen too.
I think it's very rare.
I don't know anything about straight people.
Not with your gay-sume.
No, it's like sometimes people will talk about, oh, I know one or two gay people, and I'm like, do straight people still exist? Like I know very few, but that's actually not true. We have a lot of amazing straight performers.
Yes, of course. You mentioned Boots, and that's the first time I ever learned of your name and saw you behind the bar itself. Boots, and then going into Junction from there. You've worked at Boots at 3 different times in your life, and it was run by well storied people, Jim Schaefer and Ross. And, Jim is no longer with us. He passed away many years ago now, but he had a larger than life presence within the bar itself. Can you tell me more about him?
He certainly did. I met Jim actually when I was working at Down Under. He was one of the owners of Down Under as well, and that's where he suggested I fill in on some shifts at Boots. He was a hard man to work for. Hence my first time at Boots only lasting a few months, and then the second time, I guess, was technically at the garage and not Boots, but also was fairly short-lived. But no matter where I went in life, and sometimes bar politics meant that I was choosing other places over Boots and over Schaefer, he really did always have my back and always welcomed me back to the space, whether that was DJing or hosting strippers or guest bartending. He was just always there to sit at that corner of the bar with and get hammered. And it was round as Sambuca after round of Sambuca, whether I was a customer or a bartender. Certainly, I do not think there were any shifts at Boots that ended with me 100% sober. And then, when he started getting sick in 2009, that was the first time I'd ever really watched someone close to me die right in front of my eyes. It was a horrible thing. And then we Ross and I tried to keep the space going for a few months after he passed, and it just didn't work. The space was way too much in debt at that point. There was just no way to get out of it. So certainly the loss of Schaefer changed the space entirely. And honestly, he was gone long before he died. Like, the Schaefer that was there the last few months was not the Schaefer that people knew and loved to hate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's love-hate for sure. Louder than life is, times 10, times a million for sure. But what would be his legacy to the Edmonton LGBTQ plus community? What would be Jim's legacy to us today?
Well, he was an owner of the Roost for a long time too, so he certainly had his mark on Edmonton queer nightlife. Certainly, when it comes to the issues of legacies, that's always tricky, because there's no one that's got a flawless resume, right? Like, no one's legacy is going to be perfect, and sadly, Jim got very angry and bitter at the end and did alienate a lot of people. But I think the nature of the community, because it is such a family, that after somebody passes, we do tend to just remember the good times and the way that he made us laugh, and like I said, the way that he did always have people's backs. Like he was there. He had no money at the end, but anything that he had, he would give you.
Well, and during this time, and we're looking at the late 2000s, the 2007 to 2010 period, perhaps, that's, for myself, that was a major period in my life where I was first coming out full time into the community. And I was going to Boots and Junction because of groups like FAB, the Fellowship of Alberta Bears, and how it grew from there. Can you tell me about working with Aaron and everybody with that FAB group and getting that started within that space?
See, I was never around Boots when it was in its heyday, like in the 80s and 90s, when it had the amazing rooftop patio and it was one of the only spaces and it was packed all the time and Con was running it and everybody was having a great time. By the time I came around, it was a lot quieter. And then after Woody's opened, it got even quieter. So when I started back in 2007, it was not a busy space by any stretch of the imagination. We had a really good Monday to Friday happy hour with the people that hung out at the corner, like what we call the Princess Bar. Wonderful people who I got to spend a lot of time with because they were there every day. But then other than court shows, there was nothing that really ever happened in the space. And they kept trying to do the dance floor thing and would have DJs in, but often on Friday and Saturday nights, it would be like me and the DJ after midnight. And that changed a little bit when Darren and Aaron started doing the beef parties, because certainly the beef parties were the absolute busiest I had ever seen that space. Like, it was at capacity and then some. There was such an amazing energy with those parties. It was just this like celebration of male sexuality and camaraderie and fellowship, and they were really, really wonderful events. And at the time, I don't think that there was any fundraising component. It was just wanting to host parties for bears who in Edmonton had not, like, there wasn't a bear club. There wasn't anything like that. So to watch beef grow into FAB and watch that expand across the province to doing all the events that they're doing now, and the fact that they've raised tens of thousands of dollars for charities over it. I guess I didn't really have anything to do with it other than being the bartender at those parties, but I do feel a sense of pride just because I watched that grow right from the beginning.
Yeah, I've got to add a story in right now when it comes to the Junction. And for some people listening in, they hear the word bear and may be confused with it. And I have a story to go with that. I was there with my mom one night eating wings, and Aaron Granley was there with some friends, and Aaron had come over to the table to say hi to my mom and myself. And Aaron asked me if I was going to the bear party, and I said, of course. Aaron took off, and my mom sighed, and you could see her shoulders just drop. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, do you have to go to the bear party? And I'm like, well, I don't have to, but I want to. My friends are there. And she goes, I don't see you as a bear. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't really have the body hair, but I'm bigger sized. And she goes, I see you more as a Shih Tzu. I'm like, a Shih Tzu? And she goes, yeah. And I was in your closet, but I couldn't find any outfits that you had. So what do you wear? And I'm like, pants, a t-shirt. And she goes, no, where do you keep your bear outfit? And so I quickly realized that my mom thought going to a bear party meant that I was a furry, which is something completely different, attached to the community somewhat, but completely different than that. So, of course, I called Aaron back over to share in the laugh and things like that. But for many years, my mom thought I was a furry who would join hundreds of people on a Friday night wearing bear outfits and drinking. And she always thought that I should have been wearing a Shih Tzu outfit instead.
The Shih Tzu outfit would have been more Yegpa. You'd have to join the puppies if you were in a Shih Tzu outfit.
Which brings us to something else too. So for people who to look at the community itself, we spend a lot of time trying just to be ourselves and express ourselves on who we are. But what we do within the community is we then tend to put ourselves into being animals. So we're bears, we're cubs, we're wolves, we're pandas, and we fit within this group itself. So that's for another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+, where we can explain our fascination with becoming part of an animal group, which doesn't mean that we're wearing those outfits in itself. But that's an aside. So, you mentioned briefly before that you never really finished a shift sober because of Jim and other people pushing drinks or towards you and all that. You've been very open about recovery, and we're going to talk in an upcoming Tales of the LGBTQ+ more about addiction and overcoming. But can you talk a little bit right now about how this type of addiction played out in your life, especially when you are working in an environment where you are selling alcohol and other things itself? It had to have been a very difficult time for you.
Yeah, it certainly was. In 2005, I started combining copious amounts of cocaine with the amount that I was already drinking, which was, and like I was already a huge drunk. Like I was out at the bar 7 nights a week. At the time, I was managing buddies. We were there all the time. Again, never left the space sober. But by mixing cocaine, it sobered me up enough to get through the night, and that really did hit rock bottom for me in 2007. And then I sort of became a functioning alcoholic cokehead when I was working at Boots. I would party and get drunk with Schaefer during the day until he went home, and then I would have my more substance-oriented friends come down for the rest of the night. Sometimes we were still there when Schaefer would come back in the morning. One weekend I was at Boots for like 72 hours straight without going home. And I thought that maybe that might change after Boots closed, but not really. Deb and Tracy at the Junction, though, were not tolerant of drinking on shift. There was like a zero tolerance for that. And I think they just kind of turned a blind eye to what was going on after shift, as long as it wasn't impacting my work. But then it just kept escalating, and I was going to hit rock bottom again. I was going to lose my job. It was any day now. I was going to lose that job, and then I'd have nowhere to, I wouldn't be able to pay my rent, so I'd be homeless again, which I had already been once in 2007. So I just made the decision to give it all up, alcohol and drugs, just boom, like that. I had a great support network. I was very lucky that I was able to do it without going to a rehab program, without some sort of organized recovery 12-step kind of thing. And everyone was like, it's going to be very hard. You're going to have to quit working in bars because it's going to be too hard. But in a way, it made it easier because a lot of the people that I had been partying with were also going through the same things. So being sober and seeing them, I can be like, oh yeah, I do not want to go back there again. So, and I like to think that by being open about it, I have maybe helped some other people with their own demons, be they drugs or alcohol or other kinds of addiction. Hopefully I have. I know certainly sometimes I haven't been able to do enough, and the body count has certainly piled up.
You've absolutely helped. It's I've seen it on Facebook. I've seen it with discussions with other people as well. And so your road to recovery has been fantastic, and congratulations on that. And big, gentle, warm bear hugs to you, because recovery is difficult. And as you've mentioned, recovery hasn't happened for everybody. And so you have to bear witness to that as well. let's move to something lighter for now, and we can always come back and everything. I I love the fact that you've had this fantastic variety within everything. Um, and there's a lot of talk about a bathhouse, and a bathhouse being a place for men to meet other men, and sexual activity often takes place during those places. Um, and at one time, there were many of the bathhouses within the Edmonton area and other cities as well. It's now gone down, of course, because of apps and lifestyle changes, things like that. But people usually talk secretively about maybe working at a bathhouse or going to a bathhouse. And yet you yourself, you're like, yep, I've worked at Down Under, I've worked at this place and this place. And I think that's fantastic, because people should never be ashamed or shy about these experiences. But can you talk about the purpose or the importance of a bathhouse when it comes to the gay man's experience?
No, certainly I was not always shame and stigma free when it came to telling people I worked at the bathhouse. When I started at Down Under, I was living at home with my parents in Fort Saskatchewan and would just drive into the city for my shifts. And, for the longest time, I told my mom I was working at a coffee shop. And then when she did find out it was a bathhouse, I did not explain what that was. And so for the longest time, she thought that my job was to actually physically bathe people. Which is not the case. If people that are listening and don't know what a bathhouse is, yeah, that's not what it is. I'm not there to hand you your rubber ducky. Bathhouses have certainly played a huge role in the community. Again, places like Down Under have been very supportive of different fundraising efforts that were going on, sponsoring Pride, AIDS awareness, safer sex awareness, programs like that happening in bathhouses. Yeah, and it's just been a place for people to cruise and connect safely. Sometimes it's safer to be in a bathhouse than to be cruising people in a park or a washroom or back in the 70s and 80s on the hill. Not that bathhouses have always been safe. Obviously, we know and we've heard about bathhouses being raided by the police, was particularly the Pisces, which happened 40 years ago later this month here in Edmonton. But the role of the bathhouse in our history is an important one, and I'm proud to have worked at least Down Under and Steamworks. Maybe not so much the Georgia.
Yeah. Now, we can't go into names or anything like that, but is there something that stands out in your time at working at bathhouse when you just were like, what the heck just happened? Or something else that stands out in your memory?
I think some of the most positive memories that I have were seeing people form connections, like people that I would see come down and they'd be very, very terrified about walking in. You could tell that it was, possibly their first time encountering other queer people. But then you watch them at visit after visit after visit and slowly become able to accept who they are. I know Down Under, especially on their nooners, had a lot of bi and closeted and married men, and who people that I would never ever see at the bars, because that would be just too much of a gay scene. But no, sometimes I see them at the bar because the bathhouse was a part of their journey of self-discovery. Plus, I have lots of good sex stories too, but I don't think this is the podcast for
that. we'll do Tales of the LGBTQ plus After Dark version at some point.
Oh, that would be fun.
We'll do a special subscription for that. And I now know that there'll be some listeners who'll be like, I'm all over that.
I'm probably getting messages right now from people saying, don't you dare talk about me.
Exactly. Or I'll get that message from my mom and go, are you sure about this?
Don't forget, bathhouses are the reason that we have Bette Midler. Bette Midler started her career at bathhouses in New York. So without bathhouses, we wouldn't have Bette Midler.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot, I would imagine there had to have been a lot of body positivity where people, not just about their queer self, but also recognizing all shapes and sizes, that people are not born immaculate with these bodies, that we're able to accept our roles and our love handles and our cushions, and that when you already feel bad because of what society tells you about your queer identity, that body positivity is on the lower side. So I would imagine a bathhouse experience could have the possibility to increase a person's self-esteem as well as making those connections.
That's actually very, very true. I don't think I've ever been as body positive or sex positive in my life as I was when I was working at the bathhouse. And it certainly was not that way when I started. When I started, I would be dumbfounded by seeing some of the. I'm like, really, you're going to hook up with him? Like, come on, you can do better. Because that's but by the end of the first 4 years of working at Down Under, that certainly wasn't what it was. Everybody is attractive to somebody. It does not matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how big your dick is. It doesn't matter if you're smooth or hairy. It doesn't matter what your race or ethnicity is. Someone is going to find you attractive because you are attractive. Everybody is attractive.
Is it hard to be as out as you are? Is it, now that I see you today, when I look at people within the community, you've put your name up here because of all the hard work that you've done. That has to be a great feeling for yourself, that, yeah, you've worked hard. But at the same time, that's a lot of pressure as well. So do you feel that pressure at this moment, or is it now clear sailing?
No, I think there's always that pressure for anyone that's in any sort of leadership position in the community. And yes, I'm just a bar owner, but I'm still. Here's a good way for me to explain the story. When I was working at Buddy's, there was this new group of kids that was coming out in the spring of 2005. And they were all very, very freshly out, and had no idea what was going on. And because they saw me all the time, they would come and talk to me with all their problems. Now, my life's a mess, and I am not the person to give relationship advice. And certainly at the time, I was not the person to be giving like work advice or sobriety advice. But just because I was older than them, and like only 10 years older than them or whatever, but that was enough for them. They called me old Dr. Homo. I didn't mind the dog homo part, but the old part was certainly a kick in the face. And I would love to be that old now, because yeah, that's a long time. But that still happens. That still happens even at Evo. Like, I'm constantly getting messages from people with, oh, what do I do about this? And I think my boyfriend's cheating on me. What do I do? And I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm in love with my boyfriend, and I think I'm drinking too much, and I don't like my job, and should I go back to school? I'm having problems with my family, and that this is not something that I have any training in. But I think it's just because I put myself out there as trying to be open and available. For the most part, people already know what they want for an answer. They just need someone to listen.
Well, yeah. And when you started off in 1999, when you worked at Georgia, the bathhouse, and Down Under, you also did pursue writing, and you wrote for Times 10, and you began creating a voice for yourself through the written word. How important has it been for you to be a writer and to continually adding to your creative process in this avenue?
That's really been the only thing in my life that's been super consistent. Like, even as soon as I could pick up a pen, my mom says I was writing stories. And but like, the first book I ever wrote was in grade 7, and it's completely unreadable now. Like, it's horrific. It's just ghastly. I'm gonna have to burn it before I die, because I don't want anyone to ever read it. But it's always been important to have that outlet to express. I was born with a gift for words, that and I guess a love and appreciation for words. As you can see, I have a book or two behind me. When I was in Lethbridge, involved with the gay organization there, I wrote for their monthly newsletter. And so when I came up here and met Dennis Cambly, who was the managing editor for Times 10. I asked about doing a column and wrote for Times 10 for several years. And then in 2003, we started our own magazine. There's a whole bunch of contentious stuff that always happens in relationships in Edmonton's community. Anyway, we're very incestuous and interwoven. And I used to not understand it. And when I started preparing for this kind of in my head, I'm like, now I'm just like right there. Everything, boom, boom, boom. Your allies one day, and then your competitors the next day. But in the end, we're all still working for the same goal. So yeah, started fresh in 2003, 2004 as a monthly magazine, and it only lasted 13 issues before we had to fold it. But that's actually how I got involved with Buddies and working for Jim Brown was through that. He was the first bar owner to buy ad space in it. Bar politics being what they were at the time. The second he bought an ad in it, the Roost and Boots and Down Under wouldn't. So even though I had worked at all of those places and was friends with all the owners, they wouldn't support a publication that was allowing Buddies and Woodies to advertise. So,
and it's brutal when we've got a relatively small community here. We have 1 million people in the city, but our community itself is small but mighty, and it's unfortunate that they couldn't get over the politics to help support such an initiative like the Fresh magazine.
And I loved the magazine, and I think Boots' decision to not advertise probably had more to do with the fact that they couldn't afford the rates. And Down Under had softened up on it just towards the end. And all three places still let us drop off the magazine there. So you would think that would have even been worse, because then we were allowing those Buddies and Woodies ads in the space. But, it is what it is. I loved my time with Fresh. Like, I loved my time with all of those other businesses, and any hard feelings are long since washed under the bridge.
I want to go back to Times 10, because that was the first gay magazine newsletter that I had ever come across. And it was interesting to learn so much about queer history, or what was going on at that time. With your article that you were doing, what did you learn about the community and as a writer yourself during this time period? Because you were fresh to the community itself.
I was very fresh to the community, and my article certainly was not news. Like, it was like opinions and observations, and a lot of like inside jokes and bitchy references about things that were going on that maybe a lot of people didn't get. The magazine itself was it did have a lot of history. It had a lot of politics. It had a lot of updates on what was going on as far as research for HIV and AIDS. I guess I was trying to have a lighter piece. So it was called My Monthly Neurosis, and it was just something that had pissed me off in the scene over the last month. So, which let's be honest, was usually a boy that turned me down.
Is there anywhere that we can collect these old issues so we can timeline this monthly column that you were doing, so we can piece together who you were actually writing about?
Well, I have all of my columns still for Times 10 and for Fresh. I know the City Archives has quite a few copies of Times 10. Now they're closed right now for COVID, which is very unfortunate, because I've been needing access to some of those magazines. Times 10 ran from 93 to 2005, so it certainly captures a huge chunk of Edmonton's queer history. And I've been working on some queer history projects that I kind of just have been wanting some Times 10s to piece together the timeline, but stupid COVID. I could read those articles now and I wouldn't know who they were about. These boys, and I think everybody knows what it's like. They mean the world to you that night, but you don't know who they are come morning.
That's true. Extremely true.
I'm in love. I'm in love. I'm in love. I'm like, who was that about? I'm like, oh, no.
You were mentioning about some of the writing that you're doing now, and we need to mention eCamp as being a significant contributor for yourself as well as Ron Byers in the writing of our history. And both of you have published articles detailing the life of the gay bar within Edmonton itself. What did you learn that was new information to you that surprised you as you were researching and writing these articles?
Those articles with eCamp, like they do try to give you a 1,500 word maximum. And Ron and I had explained that 1,500 words would be impossible to talk about 50 years of gay bars. And so they were willing to give us 2 articles, so 3,000 words. We ended up submitting about 7,500 words, because that's just what needed to do, including a list of all the bars and their addresses and timelines, although we have found more since. So that's frustrating. The complete and comprehensive list is no longer complete and comprehensive. Certainly, having friends like Ron and working on the project with Ron, I got to learn a lot about the impact that gay bars like Flashback and the Roost had just on provincial liquor laws in general. Like things were very different back in the day. Like in the 50s, men and women couldn't even like drink together in the same bars. Which I guess would have been fine for a gay bar. There were certainly gay bars that didn't allow women in, even in the 80s. But yeah, Flashback and the Roost, more so Flashback, but also the Roost, fought the Alberta Liquor Control Board on a lot of issues, just to make it easier for people to drink and have a good time. Because the bars were so important for gay people, I think it was more important for gay bars to have these fights than.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting is learning in the early days that you couldn't leave your table to go and converse with people from another table when it came to your liquor, that the liquor had to be brought to your table, you had to consume it. And it just brings up the fact that we're in a COVID time, and the times that
I was going to say that's exactly the COVID rules.
Yeah, that you've been able to open up Evolution on a few rare times, and those rules that were at the beginning for the gay bars back in the 70s are the COVID rules of today. So this full circle taking place is just astounding to me.
It is weird the way that there are some parallels that can be drawn between what's happening with COVID and history of gay bars, or even early years of HIV and AIDS with like, oh, I'm not wearing a condom. What's the same? It's the same as I'm not wearing a mask. Like, oh, AIDS is just a government conspiracy. COVID is just a government conspiracy. Like, they're certainly very different in their impact globally, but some of the parallels are interesting.
What does love mean to you?
What does love mean? Oh, boom, that was out of left field. Love was the last name of Edmonton drag queen Lena, and also the last name of Edmonton drag queen Ashley, and the last name of Edmonton drag queen Dee. That is what love means. 3 lovely drag queens. No, I don't know what love means. Love is, without a doubt, I can say I love what I do. Without a doubt, I can say I love the community. I love the family I have found in that community. As far as romantic love, I don't know. I've been single for over 7 years now. I don't know that I don't know that I've ever really had like that, rom-com fairy tale love. I don't know that it's that important if you've got enough other kinds of love in your life.
Well, I bring that up only because with your writing of books, they do have a romance feel to them, and people coming together after hardship and overcoming obstacles within its way. And so I'm interested in that. What draws you towards writing in this avenue?
It's weird because I don't actually read a lot of romance. So the fact that I'm writing romance is a little weird. I think it's just it's stories that people can all connect to, right? We've all experienced the quest for love. We've all experienced heartache. We've all experienced. Chances are we've probably all experienced, being cheated on or being in a relationship that was toxic. Sadly, that's probably true. That it is a universal truth. So just those themes will resonate with people, and certainly they resonate with me. Like my playlist, even like my gym playlist when I used to go to the gym. We're like power ballads. Like I'll do like cardio to power ballads. Just that's what I've lived on my whole life. So like, my whole life I've just been in search of that impossible relationship fairy tale. So even when I was after girls, it was the great unrequited loves of my life.
And how many books have you written so far that have been published?
I have 9 out right now, and a 10th, maybe 11th, maybe even 11th coming this year. We'll see.
Fantastic. And so for people who want to seek out your books and to give it a dabble, where is the best place for us to order a book to read?
I would recommend locally Audrey's. Audrey's is an independent bookstore on Jasper Ave that's always been super supportive of the LGBTQ community. You can get them all on the big A too, but if you want to support local, go with Audrey's.
And you said you have a potential book coming out later this year. Is it within the same genre itself?
Yeah. So my last 2 books were in a series called River City Romances, A Fluid State and Starting Over. And so this current one is It's kind of the 3rd one in the series. They're all standalone, but they're all based in the same fictional town, which is not Edmonton, even though it's got a downtown right on a big, wonderful river. It's a made up city. And yeah, so this one and the 2 after it are all going to be set in that kind of same world with a lot of characters overlapping.
So if the city is made up, even though it is Edmonton in its way, the cast of characters, are they fictional or are they based upon people that you've experienced in your life working within the community?
Certainly for these books, the characters are fictional. My first couple of books, there was certainly a lot more bleed over between reality and fantasy. One of the first books I put out was called Parallel Lives, which was, even though all the names were made up, it was just about boots. Like I didn't actually even change Schaefer's name. Like he was dead at that point. He couldn't sue me, and yeah, it's so that was a little bit more autobiographical. I would often write that one when everybody else had gone home from the bar and it was 5 a.m. and I was sitting there drunk and high, and hadn't written for a decade at that point, and got the idea to do this, bouncing back and forth between this guy who was a bartender at this bar in Edmonton and his coming out in university in Lethbridge. And yeah, most of those stories have some basis in reality. But certainly since then, I kind of purged all that out, and now it's just fiction all the way. Sometimes I'll throw a little nugget of Edmonton truth out for like an inside joke. One of the drag queens in this book is talking about her original drag name, and that original drag name belongs to an Edmonton queen. So maybe she and I will be the only ones that get that. But
it's a nice wink. It's a nice
wink. That's a good way to put it.
How has writing or that writing process helped you with your recovery and becoming who you are today?
Certainly, the first few books that I wrote after I got sober, my head was still very focused on the drug and alcohol part of the scene. So those books were a lot about that too. And then the further along I got in my recovery, the more I wanted to include sober people, or at least be responsible when I'm talking about, when characters are talking about the fact that they're out all the night partying and they're so hungover and though they've never been that drunk. And I want to not shy away from the conversations that are important about addiction and recovery. I try to have, like, my books are lighthearted and entertainment, like just trashy gay novels, but I do like to have moments in there that resonate with a deeper meaning and purpose.
Well, and earlier in the conversation, you mentioned Evolution and co-partner with your uncles. And I'm going to speak specifically about your Uncle Murray. How important has his influence, being a proud out man, been in your life?
It's weird. You'd think it would be more it's hard to determine. Him and Scott have been together my whole life. like him and Scott have been together since the very early 80s. But his parents, so my grandparents, were like super crazy anti-gay religious. Murray and Scott certainly didn't stay very long at Edmonton. I was only 8, I think, when they moved to Vancouver. And it was always Murray and his roommate, Scott, that they just have to sleep in the same room when we go to visit because there's no other space. So I guess it was always something I knew, but it was because it was never confirmed. It wasn't ever something that was talked about. Like my grandparents would have kind of avoided it. My mom would kind of make jokes about it. So certainly I didn't have, and this is certainly not their fault, but I didn't necessarily have the up close personal gay role model that I could have been if they were closer. This was the 80s and the 90s, and that still just wasn't a thing, right? When my mom did find out I was gay, she immediately messaged my uncle and started accusing him of molesting me or him being responsible for it. And at that point, the relationship changed once I came out too. Now, they knew I was gay long before I did. Some of their earliest memories of me are just insisting on listening to Madonna all the time. So that was kind of a giveaway. And certainly that changed it. Like they wrote a big letter and it kind of like told me more about their stories, because obviously I didn't know any of this at the time, right? But they lived in Vancouver, so we didn't spend a lot of time together. They rarely came home because, like I said, the family was not super supportive of that relationship. Then they moved to California, and so I saw them even less. I went down to Palm Springs a couple times while they had the hotels there. So when they moved up here to do this thing together, we thought it would be really easy because we were family, but we realized that even though we were family, we were strangers. And my growing up was very different than their growing up, and my coming out was very different than their coming out. And just how I react to things is not the way that they react to things. So it took a year and a half to figure out how to navigate those waters together. Now certainly I can't imagine my life without them. Like they've changed my life in so many ways. They're not just my uncles. They're surrogate dads, and they are friends, and like we all have family, but we don't always have to be friends with our family. So I'm very lucky that I am friends with them. I'd like to think that it's been kind of reciprocal. Like I can't just learn from them, right? I like to think that I've imparted some blessings into their life. So
I would hope at some point.
Well, that's the thing about life. There's never do-overs. So
yeah. And so, Rob, would you look back on your gay-sume and do a do-over at any point?
That's weird, hey? Like there's always people always like, oh, I don't have any regrets, and I'm like, I'm not going to say that's true. Like there's certainly moments that I wish that I knew now, or knew then what I know now, that I would have done things different. Maybe not necessarily with jobs, but certainly with sobriety. I would have liked to have become sober sooner. I would have liked to have maybe appreciated jobs and certainly appreciated some of my employers more when they were around or when I worked for them. Certainly, I've got some relationship things that I think would be different. When I moved from Lethbridge to Edmonton, I brought my boyfriend with me, and I don't know that necessarily was the smart move for either of us. Ironically, we just had that conversation last week, him and I, for the first time, and he doesn't regret coming up, even though things got kind of toxic. So I guess you never know what other people really think until you talk about it. Would I change things? No, I'm really happy with where I am now. So once you start messing around with the past, you don't know what it's going to happen in the present. So at the end, I am happy with where I am now. So I would leave my past the way it is.
And you've had all these great successes with everything that you've been doing, and everything continues to go up and up, even with the dips and the valleys that takes place. Can you look back at everything that you've done so far to this point and say that was a huge success that I'm proud of, and that is what I want as part of my legacy?
I've spent a lot of time on my own since COVID hit, because I live by myself, and then COVID restrictions, I've been trying to follow them as much as I can. So it certainly has given a lot of time for that kind of introspection. And when I do look back, I'm like it is like my life is littered with amazing successes, and it's littered with incredible relationships with people that have enriched my life in ways that I didn't even know it needed enriching. So yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy with where my gay-sume has gotten over the years.
So where does your gay-sume go in the future?
I don't know. There's a press conference today, so we'll see what Kenny says. I want the bar to reopen. When Boots closed, there was no notice, and Boots had been a gay bar for 30 some years, and it was just, we kicked everybody out, and then Ross told me we were not reopening, and it was really painful for the community. Gay bars do become homes to people, and I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want it just to be, okay, we're closed for 2 weeks for COVID, and then we're closed for 2 months, and then we just don't reopen. It's very important for me to reopen, just so that if we do close down, we can close down properly, and give the community a chance to say goodbye to the space, and give us a chance to say goodbye to the community, because without the community, we wouldn't have had any of the successes that we've had. Certainly, I have no plans on closing it down. I want it to be around as long as the city wants it and needs it. Where my own life will take me, I don't know. I've been really enjoying this queer history stuff, and I want to do that a little bit more. I've been working with a queer history project through McEwen on some stuff. Right now, I'm working on kind of a history of the relationship between Edmonton's LGBTQ community and Edmonton Police Services. Digging back through the archives, going back to 1942 and the witch hunt at the Strand. So I'm really enjoying that, and I want to do more of that. And obviously, I've got like a dozen books on the go, so I'll be doing that too, and see what happens. And like you had said earlier in the conversation, it's nice to see some of the people that started their own queer journeys and gay-sumes in our space, going on to do wonderful things, whether those are performers or just people. So it's just nice to see, and then to know that at some point in their future, they might be looking back at their life and see me as part of it.
So what would you say to that 13-year-old self? What would you say? In Fort Saskatchewan, I believe you would have been at about 13 years old. Yeah. So what would if you had a conversation, knowing what you know today, what would you say to him?
Probably nothing to the 13-year-old. But during lockdown, I realized that it was 14 was the disaster year for me. I went from being like center in all my yearbook pictures, happy and smiling, to like hiding in the back and quite hating myself between 13 and 14. So I don't know what I would tell him. This is very RuPaul. I would say like I don't want to say just something like cheesy, like it's going to get better, but like it's going to get better. I think I probably would have encouraged that early coming out part of me to find a community quicker. There wasn't GSAs or anything back then in the 90s, but I did go to Boys Town, which was the gay coffee shop, when I was in 94, but I only went there once and didn't immediately find whatever I was looking for. So I never went back to that. And if I had kept going, I think my life would have been different, because that quest for community, I guess, is what it's always come down to. So I would just tell him, just smile more, like fuck. Like, yeah, smile more, and just be more patient. Things are going to get better, and be nicer to your parents.
People who are listening to this might be going to themselves, Doug, why haven't you talked about the court? Why haven't you talked about Rob being an emperor and all of those type of things? Don't worry, that will just come up in another episode. As we get into June, July, August, we're getting closer to Edmonton coronation. We're going to talk more about the stories about the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, Rob's connection with it, and what's happening today as well. So that's next time on Tales of the LGBTQ plus for sure. So don't think that we're not talking about it. It's coming. We're going to talk a lot about that at a later time. Hey, we're coming to the end of our time together here, Rob. You've met a lot of people, and you've been part of people's stories. You've been part of people's lives. Friendship, whether you want to be in generic terms or short, or more specific, finding community, finding friendship within the community itself. You've obviously found it multiple times. Can you talk a little bit about how important friendship is?
There's nothing else that's more important. Friends are the ones that you can celebrate with at all the highs, and I mean that emotional highs, not cocaine highs. Although certainly those were friends along the way too. But they're also the ones that are there to pick you up when you're down. They're the ones that you grieve together. Certainly, there's been a lot of grief. The body count over the last 10 years has been high. Not that I'm not saying that other people don't have more loss, but there's been loss of people that I wouldn't have got through without friends, and I like to think that that was also reciprocal, that I helped them get through, usually with an inappropriately timed joke, just because that's what I do. But friends are what it comes down to. There's people that, and it's hard to not talk court, just because so many of them are court related, in Edmonton or the circuit in general, but just people that, just because of the nature of the community being so small and interconnected, that people that I may have only known briefly in 99 or 2000, but just because I still know them now 22 years later, there's connections that go through the years, and that are deep and meaningful, because you've grown together. And yes, sometimes you've fallen down together, or some have triumphed while others have failed, and there's jealousy and anger and betrayal and envy, and there's a whole bunch of negative emotions. But there's also so much camaraderie and joy and celebration. So I definitely cherish my friends.
And hopefully soon we'll be able to all come back together again and celebrate and cherish in person.
Here's hoping. I'm going crazy, trapped in my little bubble here.
Yeah, amen. I understand that all too well. On behalf of Rob, I just want to thank all of you for listening to our conversation today. Again, Rob's going to be back multiple times in the future for many different topics that we have planned. So you're going to hear more from Rob and his adventures at a later date. But until then, once again, thank you for listening. Please be good and always text when you get home. Until next time.